Hi, I'm Tamara Levitt, and tonight's sleep story is called The Lavender Valley. Before we begin, let's take a few moments to settle in and get comfortable. Nestle yourself under the covers and get cozy. Whenever you're ready, close your eyes. As your body contours into the mattress, allow the weight of your back, hips, and legs to rest gently. And as your pillow cradles your head, feel the muscles in your neck and shoulders relax. Allow any tightness to loosen. And to help transition your mind and body from the thoughts and bustle of your day to the peace and repose of this moment, let's take a few long, deep breaths. Taking a deep inhale and a slow, full exhale. Letting everything sigh out of your body. With each breath you take, feel yourself become more and more relaxed. And now, our tale begins. Sophia stepped onto the balcony and into the cool air of the early morning. She stretched her arms into the darkness, yawning an unself-conscious yawn. She tucked her hands into the pockets of her robe as a single shiver shuddered down her spine. A gorgeous vista unraveled before her. Just below, a coating of fresh dew covered the elaborate garden that decorated the grounds of the little hotel. The black sky was showing its first sign of daybreak. A hint of blue appeared behind a crowded cluster of mountains in the distance. Sophia spotted the moon shining right above her head, like a jewel beset on darkness. She leaned against the railing and let the mild breeze sweep through her tousled hair. She inhaled a deep breath, absorbing the crisp morning air. The hotel's owners, a lovely retired couple, ambled arm in arm across the garden, each with a cup of steaming tea in their free hand. She smiled and waved at the lovely couple, and the lovely couple smiled and waved back. On a table in the corner of the balcony, a chrome pen rested upon a blank pad of paper. Sophia felt a pang of discouragement at the emptiness of the pages. She had traveled across an ocean to this picturesque village by the mountains in search of inspiration. And now, on her last day, it had yet to show up. Staring at that pen and pad, the vacant whiteness of the pages seemed to shine back at Sophia like a spotlight. All of a sudden, a twinkling spark of light caught her attention way up in the sky. A bright, glittering object appeared to arc through the atmosphere, soaring down toward the cluster of mountains in a vast sweep. A tail of sparkling dust streamed behind it like a shooting star. It careened down from the sky rocketing to a furious crash just out of sight in the mountains. The impact sent a thunderous pop echoing across the landscape and beamed a split-second flash of brilliant pink for miles around. And then, just like that, it was gone. Sophia scanned the garden for the lovely couple, for surely they would confirm the astounding thing she'd witnessed. But there was no one. She combed her field of view for any hint of what had happened. A lingering twinkle in the sky, or a rising line of smoke amid the mountains. But there was nothing. It was still a dark and cool morning. The sun was still beginning to rise. Dew still covered the grounds of the hotel, and it was as though the twinkling spark of light and the thunderous pop and the split-second flash of pink never happened. Standing there on her balcony, Sophia wondered if she had imagined the whole thing. She stared out on the mountains, mouth ajar, eyes blank, bewildered. Slowly, a smile curled its way across her face. Because who to tell, and what to say, and how to explain, and besides, who would believe? She cast a thoughtful gaze across the spectacular scene stretching out before her. Beyond the garden, a narrow river bordered the edge of the property. It wound and wandered off into the distance, through a village and across a checkered quilt of fields and farmland. The river disappeared into a dense forest that rested at the foot of the mountains. Sophia looked below to the hotel grounds. Her eyes traced a curving pebble path that toured through the garden. It meandered past walls of hedges manicured into rounded rectangles. Beds of flowers tidied into concentric circles. Stone sculptures mounted in patches of trim grass. And leafy bushes stationed around dignified trees. Moonlight glimmered off the leaves and glistened off the grass. In the center of the garden sat a small courtyard with wooden benches facing inward on each of 4 sides, like a mini town square. On its floor lay a surface of thousands of tiny stones of all shapes and colors, arranged into a meticulous, breathtaking mosaic. It was an image of an angelic young woman with an opulent gown and flowing hair. She held an intense expression that managed to be fierce, yet peaceful. Every time Sophia stood on the balcony and took in the view, her gaze would travel the landscape, the mountains, and the garden. But she would always stop and admire the angelic young woman drawn in an abundance of tiny stones on the floor of the courtyard. There was something magical about it. The image seemed lifelike, as though at any moment the young woman might blink or smile or speak. Sophia looked over to that pen and pad in the corner, and they almost seemed to be looking back. She picked them up and paced through her room, down the stairs, and out into the garden. She sat down on a bench in the mini town square, its surface glinting in the moonlight. Just then she heard something crunching down the gravel path toward her. She turned to see Matisse, the hotel's handsome golden retriever, a puppy of 3 months. He bounded about on his furry paws, athletic but ponderous, as though roller skating for the very first time. He leapt up and greeted Sophia with a sniff and a nuzzle. A coat of soft, rugged fur covered him from head to paw to tail. Droopy ears flopped around his youthful face. Scruffy eyebrows perked above his black, innocent eyes. And a mint green collar hung around his neck. "Well, good morning, good-looking," Sophia said. She gave Matisse an enthusiastic 2-handed rub, starting on the head, then behind the ears, down the back, and under the belly. He panted and pawed, and then gave her cheek an affectionate lash with his warm, wet tongue. Matisse was the hotel's canine in residence, and he hadn't left Sophia's side since she first set foot on the property. The lovely couple found his attachment adorable, encouraging the pup's role as Sophia's official host. Matisse hunched down beside her and busied himself with a tennis ball in need of a good chew. Sophia brushed her hair behind her ears, angled the pad of paper on her lap just right, and hovered the pen above the page, processing, pondering, searching. Surely the twinkling spark of light and the thunderous pop and the split-second flash of pink would inspire something, but nothing came. After an hour of scrawling a single word and scratching it out, only to scrawl and scratch out another, she lifted her head from the nearly blank page. The sunrise was now in full effect, drenching the morning with a flood of sunlight. A breeze picked up coming in from the mountains, and with it, an alluring fragrance wafted over the garden. It was a soft, milky, floral scent. Sophia inhaled deeply, taking in the aroma, holding it, studying it, but she couldn't place the smell. She inhaled again, deeper this time, but again couldn't place it. She found herself delighting in the mysterious aroma. It danced its way through her nose and into her lungs, relaxing her more and more with each breath. A soothing sensation crashed over her and rippled through her body. She soaked in the scent for a few moments, her breath slowing, mind clearing, body relaxing. It was glorious. She sat silent and still, gazing out on the mountains. She thought back to that mystifying sight before sunrise, the spark of light that had crashed down from the sky. Slowly, a resolve bubbled up and settled in. She would venture out to the mountains and see what she could find. Sophia returned to her room, packed a bag, and suited up. Departing the hotel, she walked through the garden, Matisse trotting by her side. She noticed her pen and pad on the bench where she'd left them. She deliberated for a moment, but then picked them up and tucked them in her bag. Sophia and Matisse set off along a path that lined the bank of the narrow river, heading toward the mountains far off in the distance. They followed the river through the heart of the village, where rooftops and turrets peeked up from jumbles of old buildings. They followed it under an aging stone bridge, which vaulted above like a grand archway. They followed it through the checkered quilt of fields and farmland, where horses galloped in pastures and lounged in stables. Before Sophia knew it, they had reached the forest that rested at the foot of the mountains. Up ahead, the fields concluded, and the river entered a fortress of cedar and pine trees. She looked up at the mountains, now so huge and imposing that they occupied her entire field of view. A camouflage of grays and greens covered the soaring peaks as portions of serrated rock mingled with patches of thick timber. A warm headwind gusted up and whistled across Sophia's face. She noticed the floral scent from earlier, as glorious as before, but more potent. She took a deep breath, savoring the warm breeze and drinking in its sublime fragrance. They ventured into the forest, following the river as it carved into the cluster of mountains. A labyrinth of trees towered on either side of the river. The forest floor bristled with brush. They trekked deeper and deeper into the forest until eventually they saw a bright light up ahead. The forest appeared to give way to a field that sprawled out ahead and baked in sunlight. Matisse trotted onward to the edge of the trees, where he stopped. Sophia reached the edge of the forest, stepped out beyond the trees, and stood motionless for a few moments, in near disbelief at the sight that spanned out before her. It was a valley of purple. A vast, voluptuous valley, sinking and stretching between the cluster of mountains, and it was covered in a blanket of lavender. Wild, flourishing purple lavender. It covered every inch of rolling hills and grew right up to the edge of a tiny lake in the middle of the valley. It climbed halfway up the sides of the mountains, as if daring to reach their peaks. It waved and weaved as the wind swept along its surface, as if a body of water with its own tide and currents. It filled the air with that glorious, soothing scent, that floral, sweet aroma that tingled through Sophia's nose and into her lungs. It radiated throughout her body, washing away any trace of tension, stress, or strain. Sophia became aware of her breath as it slowed and deepened. She felt supremely grounded in the moment. The river appeared to flow through the fields of lavender, eventually draining into the tiny lake in the middle of the valley. A small white structure perched at the edge of the lake, as though watching over the mouth of the river. Sophia glided down the path, looking from side to side, marveling at the endless purple. She reached out and dipped her arm into the passing ocean of lavender. Her arm skimmed along the top of the plants, tickling her forearm and palm. She held a flower in her hands and examined it gently. It rose up sturdily on a narrow, bright green stalk. At the top, a magnificent headpiece blossomed, a narrow bunching of delicate purple petals. A fine layer of silky fuzz covered the entire plant. She allowed the soft petals to caress her hand. Up ahead, the path came to an end, turning inward toward the river, where a small wooden raft was tied to a rickety dock. A sign read, "Raft of the Commons, use freely." A paddle lay across the raft, which rocked in the water. Sophia climbed down onto the raft, and Matisse jumped aboard beside her. She untied the raft, and they were afloat, coasting down the river. They toured along with the current, weaving down the river through the lavender meadows. Sophia stood at the back of the raft, paddling and steering, and Matisse stood at center front. Sophia found herself exquisitely tuned in to the cosmos of stimuli happening all around her. Sensation, sound, spectacle, and smell. She noticed the sounds of the river, the gush and flow and trickle of the water as it eddied around rocks and streamed against muddy banks. She felt the gentle rise and fall of the raft as it heaved and dipped in the wavering water. She heard the breeze brushing through the floral fields. She saw billowy clouds sailing across the sky and sunlight glinting off the water. She felt the sun's rays warming her forehead and the wind blowing through her hair. And she smelled the marvelous, soothing lavender fragrance that permeated the valley. The river reached its entrance to the lake, where another rickety dock extended from the riverbank. Sophia dipped the paddle into the water to steady the raft, guiding it to a soft bump against the dock. She tied it up and stepped ashore. Sophia looked over to see that the white structure beside the lake was a charming gazebo. Beside it, a sign read, "Gazebo of the Commons, please enjoy." Inside, a humble desk faced the tiny lake. In the middle, dozens of pillows and cushions filled a spacious bed that sank into the floor. A pile of blankets lay stacked beside it. She sat down at the desk and pulled out her pen and pad. She looked out at the majestic view, the lake, the rolling valley, the ocean of lavender, the soaring mountains, the peaceful sky. She took a few deep breaths, allowing the lavender scent to fill her lungs and cascade through her body. She felt calm and at ease, her mind quiet, body relaxed, attention centered. Sophia looked down at the blank page, cocked her pen, and began. And out of her mind and onto the page poured a torrent of creativity. Her scrawling hand could hardly keep up with her overflowing imagination. She wrote line after line, words falling into perfect place, elegant passages springing forth in full form. She had tapped into a hidden reservoir of creativity, where an endless plenitude of ideas, perspectives, phrases, words, and metaphors awaited the mere motion of her pen. She sat in exquisite focus, in a state of flow unlike anything she had experienced. And when her hand marked the last word on the last line, on the back of the last page, she placed the pen atop the pad and exhaled a satisfying exhale. It felt as though she might have just written something that would change the world. The sun had tucked behind the mountains and was evidently setting out of view. A tint of dark pink covered the sky. As the sunset ran its course, Sophia and Matisse sat together on the steps of the gazebo and gazed out across the valley, around the mountains, and up to the sky. The tint of dark pink gradually gave way to a mantle of darkness, ornamented with a sheet of shimmering stars. Sophia lit a candle on the desk and climbed into the sunken bed of pillows and cushions. She allowed the weight of her body to plunge in, the cloud of pillows squishing and puffing to support her. She fanned a few blankets over the bed, covering her cozily. Matisse climbed in and snuggled up at her feet. Sophia looked up at the gazebo ceiling, which was covered from edge to edge with a vivid, colorful mural. It was an immaculate painting of the angelic young woman, the same young woman from the mini town square back at the hotel. But instead of wearing a fierce yet peaceful expression, she was curled up to a plump pillow, eyes closed, fast asleep. Sophia cozied into bed, delighting in the relaxation spreading through her body. Her awareness settled on her breath as she felt her chest rise and fall, rise and fall. Sophia bathed in a bottomless sense of gratitude. She was grateful for the creative outpouring that had come at long last. Grateful for her dear and furry friend Matisse. Grateful for the angelic young woman, for the lovely couple, and for this wondrous Lavender Valley amid the crowded cluster of mountains. As she dozed off, Sophia's awareness traveled her muscles and joints, starting at the top of her head and wandering down to the tips of her toes. She felt lightness in her forehead, temples, jaw, and mouth. She felt softness in her neck, shoulders, and back. She felt relaxation in her arms, elbows, and wrists. There was lightness in her hands and fingers. She felt looseness in her hips, legs, knees. All the way down to her feet and her toes. As she sank into the bed, her body felt weighted, and she fully relaxed as the soft blankets wrapped around her. Breathing in, a sense of comfort flowed through her. Breathing out, her mind felt quiet and still. As her breath slowed, she felt calm and peaceful, safe and serene. And within a few breaths, Sophia slipped off to a deep, sound, peaceful sleep.